Good morning. Welcome to the Greater Miami Expressway Agency Board meeting, and I would like to call our meeting to order at 9 a.m. So let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Board Member Blanco, would you like to lead us?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So GMX continues to do great things in the community, and it's an exciting time to see continued investment by our agency. So now I will ask our corporate board secretary to conduct a roll call of all board members.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Cancio,
Present.
Vice Chair Perez,
Present.
Treasurer Pages,
Present.
Secretary Blanco,
Present.
Secretary Miller.
Present.
Next, we have declaration of voting conflicts. Board members, at this time, please advise if you have any conflicts based on the items on the consent agenda or regular agenda. Hearing no conflicts, we move forward. Now let's move to our public comment period. If you wish to address the board today on any topic, you will be given 3 minutes to speak. To our board secretary, do we have any members of the public who have signed up to speak to the board?
We do not have any.
It's not too late. If anybody's present that would like to speak, please come forward to the board secretary. Anyone? So nobody's here to speak to us. Now we move to the regular agenda. Today we will be conducting interviews for executive director for the agency. For background, I will ask Michelle Hedges, Human Resources Manager, to provide an overview of the national search process that was conducted and the process the board will go through this morning. Ms. Hedges is recognized.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Is it on? Yes. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. As you are aware, on September 27th, the governing board approved the director search, and also on November 17th of 2023, the executive search committee was created. On March 28th, the job description was approved, and it was authorized to post for 30 days to actually conduct an internal search. So the job actually was posted on March 28th, 2024, and it was closed on April 26th, 2024. The results actually, we received 199 applicants. Of the 199, 6 met the minimum qualifications in accordance with the job description. When I went to screen the actual applicants, 6 out of the 6, 3 withdrew due to the fact that they have actually obtained employment somewhere else. And then, so all of that was presented in the last executive search committee meeting. And on March 29th, the decision was made to actually have a full board on-site interviews, which is where we are today, with the 3 candidates that are being presented for the executive director role of GMX.
And so we have 3 candidates that are going to appear before us today.
Yes, ma'am. And then if you go to your manila envelopes, even though it's in the, most of this is in the regular package, but just for an easier process, as far as the interviews, each candidate, I've allotted 1 hour for the time period. Then afterwards, the board will have a discretionary time to actually review all of the applicants. There is also a scorecard that is included in the packet for each board member to complete based on the categories. And then upon the recommendation and the approval of the board of a candidate, then legal will actually reach out and start the negotiation process. If you notice in page 2 and 3 in the packet, I did include the executive director job description, just as an easy reference. Then you'll also notice that the executive director interview questions are there. The candidate will be given 5 minutes to introduce themselves, and then the questions are posed there. We'll consistently ask the same questions of all the candidates, and then at the end of the questions, the candidate will be given 5 minutes to actually add any additional comments or summarize anything that they feel that they would like to emphasize on. And then I would ask that after that, the candidate evaluation form, based on the categories that are presented, and the categories are transportation knowledge and experience, financial knowledge and experience, community relations experience, and then leadership experience, on a score of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, which is no knowledge or experience, to 5 being the highest, which is exceptional knowledge and experience. If each board member could please complete the score sheet based on the interview, and then that will be presented to HR and legal to actually tabulate the scores to facilitate the discussion.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No. I was going to recognize you to speak. Board Member Pages.
All right. So we're ranking on this score sheet here, right? And then you guys are going to tabulate it and come up with a score.
Yes, sir.
We're not ranking the candidates ourselves in orders of who we would hire.
Well,
Because there's a number of other areas
right.
that are important to, at least to me, that are not here.
So once the evaluation sheets of the numbers have been tabulated, you're not bound by to hire the highest scoring candidate. So you can factor all those things in. You'll have the final tabulated numbers for discussion, and then the board can have discussion, make motions as to what you want to do with that.
Publicly.
Yes.
Okay. The questions are asked by whom?
It would be asked by one of the board members. Or I can also ask the questions. It's really truly up to the guidance of the board of how they would want this process to go.
I defer to the chair on that.
Well, Board Member Blanco was the one that led the.
Yes, and
The
I
search.
actually, I'm glad we're here already. I wanted to put in a motion, actually, to table from the agenda, to make a change to the agenda, to table item number 2A, B, and C, which is the discussion period, the tabulation and, delegating authority and whatnot, in lieu of the fact that we're gonna interview these gentlemen today. I believe that there should be some time for discernment for, what our opinions might be about their interview process. I believe it would behoove us to do due diligence on ourselves before we tabulate these gentlemen and make a final decision today, as opposed to setting some time aside to think about that and possibly at another date, a future meeting, next board meeting perhaps, then come in after we've reviewed things and have a deeper
Do
discussion.
you want to make the motion and then we can have a discussion
Right.
about this?
Okay, so I would like to put in a motion to table items 2A, B, and C.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so now discussion on this motion. Personally, I really would like to complete the process today, just because of 199 applicants, we got 6 applicants, and 3 already got jobs. And I'm afraid that if we take longer to make a decision, it's going to just impact the 3 candidates that we have now. So I don't know how much time you were thinking about to make that decision, but I just thought we've had those resumes, we've reviewed them, now we're going to meet them. I just want to understand a little bit more of what you think it's needed to, because we don't, we don't have to go by this formula. We can have a discussion after we meet them. But if you want more time to analyze the resumes and talk to them, I just need to know like how much time you're thinking about, because I think we need to make a decision.
My thoughts were probably to perhaps ask to table it for the next board meeting. Or if we needed to call a special board meeting before then, the next board meeting, I believe, is July 11th. I don't know if that's too long, but I don't know what the right amount of time is. In my view, I believe that having a final decision, after interviewing this gentleman for the short period they're going to be with us may be too hasty. This is a very important position, and it's,
Oh, absolutely.
know,
Absolutely. So when your committee met, I wasn't part of
Yes.
that. You personally have not spoken with any of the candidates?
no, we have
Other than, I
not.
guess, our interim executive director.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that, Board Member Blanco, just because, and even in our agenda item report, it just says that on May 9th, we approved the scheduling of just the selected candidates. That's it. And that was my understanding, that that's all we were doing today, was just doing the interview process. I honestly did not know that today everything was going to be done. So I don't know if maybe waiting a month, but maybe looking into a special board meeting. I know it's hard to get the schedules, but it was my understanding, or that's what I thought that day, that we
yeah,
were
it's
just going
funny.
to listen to the 3 selected candidates.
Since I
That's it.
wasn't part of your search
Right.
committee,
Yeah.
my understanding by looking at the agenda was that we were going to make a decision today.
Correct.
And I was ready to make a decision after we meet and the candidates.
Correct. And when I reviewed the agenda, I also saw that, and I went back to our previous committee meeting notes and realized, no, we had talked about just interviewing today, not necessarily making a decision. But that's why I made the motion, and we can
Right.
discuss, vote on it.
Sure.
Those are my thoughts. That,
No, thank you. And you've been doing, the work in the committee, so I understand that. So, yes, Board Member Miller.
And I appreciate, I too, when looked through this, was like, okay, we're going to hear from the candidates, we're going to make a decision, we're going to have an open conversation, make a decision, and move forward. I understand the concern of wanting to kind of absorb, but I don't want to wait till July.
No, I mean, there's,
all.
that's what we were discussing it, and we'll
Yeah,
make,
I
we'll vote
feel
on
like
it.
we would need to have a short turnaround time if we're not going to make that decision today. I do think waiting 6 weeks is not in our best interest.
Okay. Board Member Page, do you have any comments? I mean, we're all talking, so.
That's the point of this, right?
Yeah, I think after reviewing the resumes and then meeting the candidates, that's the way I've always hired. You just know. I know, so I'm comfortable making a decision today. That's my position.
Are you in any way thinking that perhaps you're not satisfied with this process or with these candidates and you want to expand the search?
no, it's
Delay it for that reason,
No,
or?
it's not necessarily that. It's just I believe that, I've interviewed people before, and I've
Right.
gone through this process. Granted, this is a little bit different, but sometimes you need to have some discernment on what's been presented to you or discussions you've had to think about it further. And I'm not saying by any means to wait to July 11th. I'm just, perhaps 2 weeks is enough. Just a short period of time to, review the answers and whatnot, and
Review the answers they give us today?
review the
Because
answers
we
given us
have-
today, take everything into account, and have some, discernment on what is presented to us, and then truly feel like, okay, yes, this is the right person or not the right person. It feels, to me, doing this at the same time, it feels a little bit rushed, to have this answered and decided today, right after the interviews.
So did anybody, so you didn't speak with them personally?
I have
Nobody
not
in your
spoken. No,
committee spoke with
Nobody in the
them?
committee has spoken to the candidates.
So who selected or who narrowed it to the 6 candidates?
Through an HR process.
The HR, but so your committee did not have an input in that?
in the actual candidates themselves, no.
Did you review the 199 applicants? Did you go through that list? Or
No, we reviewed the short list, which is actually the three candidates that are here today. We have copies of what they submitted, their resumes, their CVs.
And is that what you envision, or this is the first time that we go through this
No,
process, so.
I was fine with that process. I think that if there was an issue with that process, the committee would have
Right,
discussed that or brought it up at a previous meeting. So I think we were okay with the process. What was not discussed or decided upon for example, in the last meeting was that we would have a decision made today after the interviews. The decision from the last committee meeting was that today was to just interview candidates.
okay.
That was my understanding as well.
Yeah,
And
and I
it's
was,
also reflected on the summary.
right, of your board meeting.
Yeah, correct.
search
And that's what I
committee.
thought. We were just doing that today.
I mean, I'm just concerned that we only have three, narrowed it down to three because other three, already got jobs. And this just started recently, so I don't want to wait 6 weeks at all. And that is my concern. Do you envision meeting with them again, speaking with them again, or before making a decision? Shouldn't we just interview them and then vote on this motion after we interview them?
That's
Or
possible.
you're not gonna
I wanted to put the motion to change
Right.
the official agenda, to make a change to the agenda
Okay.
without, in lieu of bringing it up later.
We can always bring a new motion, but we can vote on this motion. Do you want to state your motion again? Do you want to put a date on your motion or amend the motion?
Let's, so today is the 30th, right? Yeah, so I make a motion to table the discussion period, tabulation, and final decision on the candidate in 2 weeks' time. Provided there's a date that works for all of us to have a special meeting for discussion.
Okay, so it's the motion is amended. Of a second.
2 weeks. I second the motion.
Okay, so we'll vote on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Nays?
Nay.
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 Okay, so the motion to amend fails. So we'll continue with the motion, with the agenda as is.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So now, are you going to call the candidates, or is Ms. Hedges going to call the candidates?
Yes, ma'am, I'll bring them in.
And I have another question, though. For the questions that are here, that you're going to ask them, was that something that the committee had an input, or you came up with these questions by yourself?
No, ma'am. I did come up with standard questions, and then I also emailed all of the board members and asked for their input if they wanted to add any additional questions.
Right.
And those questions were incorporated into the questions that will be asked today.
Perfect. Okay, so then you're welcome to,
I have a question.
sure.
Can we also add questions or in addition to these, or that's it?
I think we can expand on these current questions. We need to ensure whatever questions we ask one applicant, we consistently ask all of the applicants.
Okay, got it.
Board Member Pages.
I'm sorry. I want to go back to the evaluation sheet. I'm just not comfortable with the evaluation sheet. I'm not comfortable with this. Is there any way we can add another line, like a intangible line, or something along those lines?
Well, I think those issues would be factored in your discussions. I mean, I suppose it's in your discretion to add, you know, something else to consider. But the numbers that this will yield are just for discussion. You're not bound by, you know, selecting the person that's the highest score under these criteria. So you could factor in those other things in your discussion, and then
Right, but
presumably
after-
somebody would make a motion.
Correct, but after an actual tabulation that's occurred, there's an actual top candidate, and then you're asking then to add the intangibles. Because once you do that, then you publicly have marked the fact that there is a candidate that was such a score, and then we'll add the intangibles after that. Correct?
Right, and I don't think that this selection process, that it's not a selection process that you're bound in any way by the result of the scoring. So you could consider the evaluation scores, and then somebody could make a motion. For instance, I think we ought to move forward with the person that came in second in this scoring, and here are the reasons why. Because these didn't capture, these criteria didn't necessarily capture some other quality of this person. And that would be completely within your discretion to do that. Alternatively, if there was something you wanted to add to the scoring, I mean, you could discuss that now, and what that would look like, and make a motion to add something else to another scoring criteria. I just think you can probably factor all that in your final discussion.
Who came up with this chart?
Leave Michelle.
Myself, and I presented it to the legal team. And that was mostly based on the fact of the job description, the main qualifications of the category, and then, of course, the addition of the community relations. Where's my score sheet?
I agree with you, with Board Member Pages. I mean, this is not an ideal.
No.
This is not an ideal evaluation sheet. But I also agree that we can have a discussion after. I mean, we're not even bound to use this. We're not even, you know, if there's a motion that says, you know, you want to have a discussion without this, and we personally go, you know, make our own analysis, we could do that.
That's my motion. I'm going to move that this evaluation form is for the individual board members' use to keep clear on what we're doing and just keep some structure, but that we actually, at the end of the process, we provide a forced ranking of the candidates to HR and to legal, and then, you know, top candidate gets 3 votes, 2 points, 1 point, whatever it is, and then you come up with a number system at the end, and you come up with the top candidate, second candidate, third candidate on those bases.
So let me see if I hear you right. Instead of doing 1 to 5 for each item, you're gonna say this one, it's the highest for this category?
No.
Or
what I'm
in
suggesting
general?
is that we use this as we're interviewing the candidates, we use it for our own purposes, which is perfect, which is fine, which is good, it provides structure. But that the tabulation is not based on this sheet, it's based on a force ranking process of the totality of the candidate, not on 4 or 5 individual items.
Okay, so.
Does that make sense?
Yes, so at the end, you're gonna say, you have 3 candidates.
Right.
One is gonna be, 3 is the highest number, so you wanna
Oh,
go,
no, if
or
I'm-
do you wanna go like
I mean, I don't
one
have to
first choice or second choice
Yeah,
or
I don't have
third
to
choice?
complicate it. I mean, we can just say 1, 2, 3, and then whoever gets the least number of points is the
Preferred
top rank.
candidate.
Yeah. So I just don't try to say this number of points. I don't care. I don't care how we do it. But I prefer to have that process where the tabulation process includes all the intangibles and all the issues that are important to this body that are not being captured on this form.
So the only numbers under your motion, every board member would just select in a ranking, 1,
Yes.
2, and 3.
Yes. And we provide it to council and HR, you guys tabulate it, and then you come back and say who the top candidate is, and then we have a discussion
Then
at that point in
discussion.
time. And then we can vote on the final candidate.
So just to clarify, we could even use this that has the 3 candidates' names, but instead of filling the 5 boxes, we're just going to put 1, 2, and 3 in whatever preference.
That would work, yes.
Is that it?
That's fine. I move whatever that was.
It's your motion. It's your motion.
Is there a second?
Discussion.
I second the motion.
Any discussion? Further discussion before we vote? Board Member
So
Miller.
I thank you. I think that this is great for taking notes.
Correct.
And sort of formulating our ideas. I have no problem ultimately just saying, this is my preferred ranking.
Yes.
Do we want to do that and then have the discussion? Is that the methodology? Or are we going to have an open discussion, then provide our thoughts on our rankings? I'm just trying to clarify what the order is.
I think that we're going to hear from the 3 candidates.
Yep, got it.
We're going to
Take our notes.
take our notes.
Okay.
We're individually, we each put our preference.
Our thoughts.
Give it to council. Council says, this is how the candidates scored.
Okay. With one
One-
being our preference.
Being our preference.
Got it? Just wanted to clarify.
And then we
Thank
can
you.
continue
And then we
having
can continue the
discussions.
conversation. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
And by then, depending, how much time we have, if we have to table any further discussion, we can
We
get
can
there
then
afterwards.
adjust on item 2, A, B, C.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
thank you. Appreciate that.
We have,
I move.
it was second.
I had seconded, so
Second.
second.
Okay. So all those in favor say aye.
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 No nays. Motion passes. Okay, so now we can proceed with the interview process. Ms. Hedges, you're welcome to call the candidates.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
And you're going to ask the questions as we proceed through the process? Was that what we determined, or was Board Member Blanco? I don't know that we actually
We did not.
determined that.
There was no determination of who would ask the actual question.
We do need to determine that.
Yes, we do.
Would you like to ask the questions?
I'm more than willing to ask the question.
Okay,
I
so,
much prefer that.
yeah, so Board Member Blanco is going to ask the questions. Thank you. Ms. Hedges, and to clarify, you're calling the candidates in alphabetical order?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hedges, are the candidates aware of the process that we're using?
Yes, sir, they are.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Alston.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Thank you for your time. We're going to begin the interview process. I would like to first start by allowing you 5 minutes to introduce yourself to the board and to the public, please.
All right. Good morning to the board, the search committee members, Madam Chair, Vice Chair. Thank you for this opportunity to present and share with you why I submitted to be an applicant for Executive Director of the Greater Miami Expressway Agency. I'm Tori Alston. I am the Interim Executive Director of the agency. I have presented a package that you'll see in front of you that demonstrates about 20 years of executive leadership experience. I've blossomed in several environments, both at the state and the local level. So what I'd like to do for the first several moments is ask you as a board to travel with me as we reimagine GMX together. Imagine changing the face of mobility, a new way of investing in our expressways and roadways here in South Florida. Just imagine, a year from now, May 2025, we look at the Miami Herald that is fair, balanced, and independent. And there are two taglines. The Miami Heat signs a new big three: Anthony Davis, Jason Tatum, and Steph Curry. I'm a Heat fan, by the way. Demonstrating an economic engine and event that would truly bring additional value to our system. Imagine Miami Speaker Danny Perez a year from now highlighting GMX on the floor. After, at that point, 2 years of demonstrated governance, financial stability, engagement with the community. But the big cheese is imagine 1 year from now, and you know what Fitch has already done just a few weeks and months ago, upgrading the bond rating to an A- with a positive outlook. That's visionary leadership. Travel with me and imagine 3 years from now, we look at the Miami today at that point celebrating 43 years in our community. Again, Hard Rock welcoming WrestleMania to the region. I'm a wrestling fanatic. Bringing additional growth and revenue across all of our expressways. And just imagine Monroe County welcoming additional investments. As you know, we've added that additional jurisdiction, a part of the 2023 legislation from the legislature. But the big news in the Miami today, as many of you have talked about as a board, GMX completing paint, finally, new paint on State Road 112. Because you've talked extremely about aesthetics, branding, system preservation, and doing more for the system. But imagine, 10 years from now, the Miami Dolphins win the Super Bowl. I'm a Dolphin fan. But after 11 years of being reestablished as an agency, GMX now invests $100 million in landscaping, LED lighting, solar infrastructure, all the types of initiatives that you as a board have talked about. But in the Miami Times, established back in 1923 as South Florida's largest Black newspaper, the big cheese, the Kendall Parkway is ahead of schedule. Travel times drastically reduced. This is the visionary leadership that is required in your permanent executive director. As a board, you've been very clear. You started this process months ago, identifying 4 core priorities for the agency around safety, system improvements and preservation, mobility improvements and congestion relief, and of course the last around transportation technology, which was very prudent because there are many innovative solutions and ideas that are cutting edge that will require us to make some key decisions as an agency. You tasked me to lead a very compassionate transition, and I think that we have demonstrated great results around really 5 core areas that you've heard me talk about at each meeting. I think I bring the right executive experience. Hopefully, I'm a great fit for the organization. But let's talk about each of the 5 areas. Let's start with governance. You've established bylaws and policies as an agency. We're going through now an additional round of policy review to make sure we got it right the first time. Around financial stability, Fitch gave us the best news weeks ago. If you had asked me a year plus if one of our rating agencies would stabilize or provide a stable outlook for the agency, I probably had a different view. But after speaking to all of our rating agencies, S&P, Moody's, Fitch, along with the team, they saw your leadership, they saw your commitment, and they've seen the financial stability and solvency of the agency. Daily operations. There's been no interruption of service. Employees were paid from day one. Vendors were paid from day one. As you recall, that was a huge conversation in the community, but under your leadership, we got it done. Around communications and public engagement, we have re-engaged many of our partners, both at the state and local level. We've engaged industry. We've engaged the business community and vendors, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. And then people and culture. We have a great team at GMX. I recall on day one entering the building, I spent the first 2 weeks with the legal team at the time, having conversations with the entire organization. I think I did that for about 30 minutes with each employee, and many of them would tell you to this day I probably could repeat verbatim many of those conversations about where were you at that time in early August of 2023? Where would you like to see the agency go? And I think that since that point, many of those employees have seen the agency move in the right direction. If you recall, you wanted us to contemplate a new mission and vision for the agency. We've done that. How do we relieve congestion on our roads? That's the ultimate question. That's our North Star. Our mission, a well-maintained and aesthetically pleasing system. How do we maximize mobility? How do we deliver congestion relief? You've demonstrated, and we continue to demonstrate, protecting our bondholders and our toll payers. Partnership is key. We can't do this alone as GMX. It takes working with our state partners, our local partners, our national industries who've been so supportive over this period of time. It's my view, members of the board, that we need experienced, collaborative, and transformative leadership going forward. I've served as your interim executive director, and I appreciate and I'm humble for that initial vote of confidence. $250 million in expenditures, $2.6 billion in assets. I've served as chief of staff at the Florida Department of Transportation. I'm the most recent Sweet 16 graduate of the IBTTA Leadership Academy. Most recently, I was appointed by the FDOT Secretary to the Planning Steering Committee that will guide transportation and infrastructure for the next several decades to come. I understand our industry. I understand South Florida. I understand board relations and communication. I think you know I probably try to over-communicate with you on the board with regular updates about key daily operations and decisions from the agency. I'll just give one example around leadership. The biggest one is having a Miami Herald article pop up on a late Friday night to say that our predecessor agency was not going to be in the building. Someone had to make a split decision, understanding employees will be impacted, understanding contractors and vendors will be impacted. But it was that split decision that I was here on that Monday morning, greeted at the front desk to ensure that all these things were in place under your leadership. And as I wrap this up, leadership in action is important. Just last week, I had a great open conversation and dialogue with Team Florida. Many wanting to hear the direction, the vision, the mission of the agency. Many wanting to know what procurements are coming post July 1. Many wanting to hear and understand the governance model of the new organization. Are we solvent? Are we thriving? Are we moving forward? I've had a national conversation, as you know, many with the same questions. Here's a roadmap ahead. Opportunities on the left, some clear challenges on the right. If given the opportunity to proceed as executive director, we've already put some building blocks in place for a new strategic plan now that you have approved your first budget and work program as a board. Federal and state grant awards, it's a must. It's an opportunity. How we look at our internal audit function. Some key areas that we can focus on as an organization. Many agencies don't shine the light on those areas, but those are critically important to business operations. What are some challenges? Congestion on our roadways. That's the biggest one, but it's a good problem and a good challenge to have. As you know, there are 1,000 new visitors per day, about a third of those right here in South Florida. Bonds and debt financing as we bring the transition to a close. How do we deal with that? What are the next steps? Looming appointments, as you are aware, from the county and TPO, our other partners, and pending county reimbursements that we're hopeful will provide additional revenue for this budget cycle. What's important is measuring, monitoring key metrics and KPIs. As a board, I wanted you to see I have given some initial thought to what July 1 forward could look like if we focus on fiscal stewardship, if we focus on continued results around relieving congestion, if we focus on ensuring our small businesses are a part of who we are as an agency. I've also given you, as you'll see on the right-hand side, and you have the package in front of you, just 2 ideas. And our friends at Texas A&M Transportation Institute have looked at different ways on how we can monitor and measure congestion relief. And there are different ways. But these are the types of things that have already gotten my light bulb going about what the next steps of GMX could look like. And lastly, as you know, the building blocks of becoming an industry leader started just a few weeks ago. I think it was a capstone when we had our state leadership right here. The governor, lieutenant governor, first lady, secretary, district secretary, Florida Turnpike Enterprise executive director, and so many others to witness you, GMX leadership, the chair, kicking off the event, demonstrating toll relief, not just here in the region, but across the state. That was the initial capstone of putting GMX front and center. Thank you.
Based on that experience, how would you approach culture changes differently in the future?
Would you mind starting? 'Cause I heard
Absolutely.
I wanna
I'll
make sure I
repeat.
got it.
I realized the microphone was off. Provide an example from your professional background where you successfully led a team through a substantial period of organizational and cultural change. What was the outcome? Based on that experience, how would you approach culture changes differently in the future?
So I'll start early on with one of my examples where I led my first state department and program almost 20 years ago. It was then at the Florida Department of Management Services where there was a transition in leadership from one governor to another. The program at that point was reporting dotted line to the executive office of the governor. They were without leadership for about 6 months. They immediately asked if I would step in on an interim basis to lead that program. That program was the Office of Supplier Diversity. At that point, responsible for working with state procurement, then the Florida Department of Transportation, looking at many supplier diversity programs at that time. The office did not have leadership. The office was lagging engagement with the community. The office had high or very high, or the response times were not as great as it should have been based on the industry standard and average. So after about 60 days, I did a little something similar to what I put in front of the board. I immediately looked for what are the key measures and metrics, how we can move the organization. We identified those metrics. We got the response times. At that point, I believe it was north of a month. Oh, I left my tea. We got it down to about 6 days, in less than 60 days. We identified top talent. We identified maybe some individuals that weren't producing as they should. Fortunately or unfortunately, there were some who decided to move on once you put a spotlight on performance. For me, that is critically important. Having a performance culture and accountability culture where you can clearly demonstrate, regardless of who's looking, that it's an industry standard that everyone would see that's widely accepted. What would I change? Or how would I approach this role as executive director of GMX? Similarly, I think identifying what's important for you as a board, me having that understanding is important. Me having a strong understanding of the KPIs, metrics, and measures that move the organization, that's important. You've told me that if safety is important, what are the metrics and measures that we can use as we look at safety and different components of safety? You've talked about small business support. So what are those metrics and measures that we can look at to see how we are doing with our small business community? You've talked about transportation technology. Are there new projects, new innovations, new initiatives? Are there new projects that would deliver the outcomes that you as a board are seeking across those 4 core areas? So I would approach in a similar fashion, assessing, scanning the organization, identifying and recognizing talent, which I've done also at GMX, and then putting in place performance metrics, measures, and outcomes so we can compare ourselves. I asked the team, they'll probably tell you a few weeks back, what makes GMX different? How would we stand if we put ourselves next to CFX or THEA and the Turnpike, but maybe a little different? What are those widely accepted metrics and measures? Is it daily commuters? Is it average daily transactions? Is it size, the number of employees of the organization? Is it the budget? What are those things that make us unique? The team, and I don't know if they're here, we grappled and we smiled, went some back and forth a lot. But I think we landed on some areas that would propel GMX going forward as we look at our industry partners, both in the state and also across the country.
Okay. What strategies would you implement to ensure that the agency's vision and mission are integrated into its day-to-day operations?
Great question. So the good news is GMX now has a new mission and vision. GMX, based on your leadership, now has approved its first budget and work program. Industry has recognized that. The markets have recognized that. Our partners have recognized that. So how we move to integrate a mission statement and a vision statement into these core KPIs and sample metrics. This is just a discussion starter. How we identify, of all of our projects as an example, which of those projects connect to your priorities. We've done that initially on that budget and work program that was approved by the board. We've started a strategic conversation just in the last several weeks on how do we get there? How do we relieve congestion? It's a very tough question, by the way. How do we improve safety? How do we reduce the number of fatalities, the types of fatalities? What are the types of measures around transportation technology that are vital? The good news, using transportation technology as an example, we've inherited our predecessor organization's previous plan around technology that we are revamping right now. So if I have the opportunity to continue as executive director, I can assure you that the transportation technology component will be one of the core prongs of the strategic plan that I've also referenced earlier in my comments.
How do you ensure effective communication and collaboration between the board and the management team?
Excellent question. Communication is key. I think this morning might have demonstrated an example of that. Typically, when the meeting starts, as your interim executive director, I'm here in the morning alongside you. But I know that there was a team in place that did an excellent job getting you to this point this morning. That's a clear example of leadership. That's a clear example of direct board engagement, direct board leadership. And it speaks to the team, your legal team, and others on the operations side of the organization. I think I've tried to over-communicate with the board regularly. I'll say typically, I try to do a Friday evening, afternoon update. Sometime it may be a Monday update or a Tuesday or a Wednesday, depending on the nature of if there's an update or an administrative action or a policy decision that might have produced some outcome that I believe the board should know immediately. So I've demonstrated that as the interim executive director. I've also ensured that everyone that reports directly to me, that you also have that interaction, collaboration, and direct engagement with. I think we've demonstrated that from August forward. Whether it is our director of finance, accounting, and budget, CFO, around financial issues, getting the green light from the board treasurer, getting the green light from the chair based on what's required from our trust indenture. If there is an engineering issue, maybe from FDOT that may arise, or any other partner, staff would reach out directly to our director of engineering and emergency management. We've had a recent outreach or engagement where I've tasked our director of transportation technology and toll operations to work on the county reimbursement. Yes, I had the initial conversations with my counterpart at the county, but I asked him to do the follow-up to ensure that we get the 8+5, because you as a board have tasked me with doing that. So those are just recent real examples of board direction to me, board direction and engagement with the team, following up on issues, decisions that you have asked collectively as a board.
What measures would you take to ensure that the agency maintains a positive public image?
Communication is important. Engagement with our partners is important. I would say from July 1 forward, and even prior, I think we have done a great job under the circumstances of the transition of working with our media partners. As an example, you'll recall for the first several meetings, I think there were at least one or two present. Maybe it's boring now because you are demonstrating leadership and results. Early on, we've had many conversations with other partners. How do we work together to promote what you're doing at GMX? When we had our previous toll relief program, we engaged our municipal partners. We engaged the TPO. We engaged the county, because they too share the same common mission and vision of moving people and goods across the region. They share the same mission and vision of working together because most customers or toll payers still, unfortunately or fortunately, some don't know the difference between the state system, Florida Turnpike, or GMX, your system. That's an opportunity for the board and team to still work on.
Could you elaborate on your experiences in developing relationships with the community, partner agencies, and elected officials?
So I think over the last several months and weeks, based on your direction and guidance to me, it's required to do exactly what you just asked. Working with many of our municipal partners, town mayors, city mayors and commissioners, working and collaborating with the county commission, working and collaborating with our TPO partners. Most recently, we've had conversations on how we can do more between GMX and the county. The good news, as you know, we have regular collaborative dialogue and conversation, and there are several pending items, potentially, that I think we're very close to moving on. Even the TPO as an example. The executive director of that agency, I think we communicate regularly, I would just say that. Because there are issues and items that may come before the TPO where we do have a presence that could impact GMX as an organization. I recall probably one of my earlier meetings was with several cities before there was a GMX budget and work program. Are there several projects that are still in the pipeline? What's the vision going forward for our city, our town, this part of the county? The good news, you as a board have passed that budget and work program. That sent a very clear signal to all of our partners. I think I have a track record of being collaborative, listening, and really producing results. As you know, this has been a very public transition, as I said to Team Florida last week, that many all across the country and in the state have taken notice of. There's been no other toll agency transition this way. There's been no other toll agency to demonstrate what you have done in less than a year this way. So communicating those success stories, communicating those achievements is important. How we tell our story is important. As you recall, back to communication partnerships, we've been looking for a comms manager. That's important. I recognized on day one, we did not have an internal communications manager. That's not okay for a toll agency on how we tell our story. That's not okay where I have to always wait working with the outside. And I appreciate the consultants and vendors. They do great work for us. But around communications, we should have someone internal that immediately is posting online, that immediately is reaching out to other communications managers and directors at other agencies, that's immediately pitching stories to the local papers about many of the great things happening at GMX. So I have demonstrated in many different capacities the value of communication, the value of public engagement, the value of partnership. At some point, you as a board may think through some projects where GMX may not be the lead, but you may want to be a partner or a partner funding agency for some project, some program, some initiative. That's partnership.
Thank you. How do you motivate employees to reach their full potential?
I'm an empowering leader. I've stayed out of the way. I've set the vision. I've set the direction. After week one, talking to my then direct reports, I identified a huge gap that we never had a standing weekly meeting just with the leadership and management team. That does not compute to me. That did not compute with me. So immediately by week two, we were meeting right next door, the entire leadership team, talking through what are the issues in your respective areas. How can other directors and leaders help you? How can we help each other? What are those pain points or hot topics that are in toll operations or engineering or on the finance side of the house? What are the areas where you need additional push, feedback, or direction? Where are the areas that have been lagging for a period of time so we can show results? Those are the types of things that we've gleaned now from a standing weekly management huddle. That's how you motivate your leadership team. You demonstrate from the top that communication and collaboration and inclusive leadership is important. I'll go backwards. When I had a conversation with every employee in the building, it wasn't in the office. It was downstairs on the first floor in the conference room, on the couch. Because I wanted to create an environment for every employee to give their honest feedback and assessment to me. Tell me what you were feeling during the transition. What were you expecting this transition to be and the outcome? You know what they all told me? Stability. We just want a permanent leader. I was able to glean that after week one and week two. You empower employees by what you just did as a board. My recommendation to you was to maintain awarding the team when they do well. And now we'll have some metrics, KPIs, and measures that we can hold everyone accountable for. That's how you motivate employees, when the board demonstrates that you support, you empower, you push the team. When the mission is clear, And one of those prongs speaks to employees. That sends a very clear signal to the workforce. There's a clear signal when we've had a series of recent openings. We've had a lot of interest. That's a good signal. Things are turning around. GMX is thriving, stable, moving forward. That's leadership.
Thank you. What do you consider to be the most important strategic priorities for our agency over the next 3 years?
Well, I think you as a board have been very clear on what those core areas are. I think you have been very clear that these 4 core strategic priorities would serve as the foundation for what we do. This is how we built the budget and work program based on your direction back in December. You kicked off your thoughts, your direction, your vision for the agency. It was your collective direction to me to the team that said, these are the 4 areas going forward that are critically important. As we build a strategic plan, and we have started those building blocks, as we connect these KPIs, metrics, and measures, as we embed them in employee job descriptions, and connect those key success factors on how we move the agency, the department, your program area, your task. As we put that process and metrics and measures in place, that's been done at many other agencies that are doing well. Employees are thriving, performing. They know what they're responsible for. There's no gray areas. That's how you set a plan. That's how you set a vision and mission that everyone understands. That's how you create a framework where it's critically clear where you are and where you're going. I've shared with you earlier opportunities and challenges. Some of those may impact the strategic plan and the planning process.
Please describe a challenging situation in which you led your team and how you applied your leadership skills to achieve the desired outcomes.
I'll focus on the one that just happened this week. When it was brought to my attention that there was potential theft, immediately for me, that was a non-starter. I asked the team within 30 seconds, I want to see the video. Let me confirm, reconfirm. There were some who I think were trying to figure it out and were pausing. It wasn't a pause moment for me. Based on the individual, based on the action, and based on the employees involved. That's leadership in the moment. I immediately said, let me reach out to my FHP partner. They were here within 30 minutes. So I could lead the process with HR on transitioning that resource away. That was leadership this week. Another example of leadership serving as the interim executive director, and there are many examples all the time. When I immediately was made aware that there was a potential violation of board policy. A weapon, potentially, that could have impacted me or anyone in the building. We talk about that first bullet all the time. It's also safety for employees. It's safety for those on the road. Instantly demonstrating leadership. Because I know with a split decision, I've seen the other side when you don't make the split decision. And there are other agencies who have dealt with it recently and who have dealt with it over time. We called every member of the fleet back to this headquarters location. I had the team meet with them while we inspected every vehicle. We found what we were looking for. Immediately, FHP stepped in and we transitioned out that instance. Safety is for employees, I'll repeat, and for those who use our system. If I had not, let's take the other side, made that split leadership decision, what could have happened? There's some information that I've uncovered during the process. Who knew what when? I won't go into the details. Who else could have been impacted? That's a bigger risk and liability for the agency that you would hold me accountable for. My job is to protect you, the board, to protect the organization, limit liability, limit risk. Your counsel would make sure of that. That was leadership in action. Just 2 examples. That involved our employees, their safety, because that too is paramount.
What would be your priorities in your first 30 days as executive director of GMX?
So, and I apologize that I put some of this up front. So I apologize, Mr. Chairman of the Search Committee. And I've talked a little bit about this already in several questions. We must have a very clear strategic plan going forward. We have the building blocks already. We have a new mission and vision. We'll have some new KPIs, metrics, measures on how we get there. A strategic plan, as I've tried to give you that 10-year focus, demonstrating to you use of our local media on how we have a 1-year view, maybe a 3-year view, 5-year view, long term. We must do that now as GMX. That's one of the first things that I work on. We've started to work on it already. We have some of those building blocks in place. But once that is presented to you and you, the board, put your fingerprints on it, that's another clear example of governance, agency stability, how you communicate with all of our partners that you've asked me about this morning, how you embed people and culture, how do you embed the team in what we do every day. That's one of the first things I start immediately if permanent executive director. There are a few other areas that are also critically important. You've passed a budget that now we begin shifting some services in-house. There are some things that will start now. Other things, tasks, will start around July 1. There's a process for that. You passed a budget that has included some additional staff. We currently have a series of openings currently on the website. How do we attract those employees to the agency? Where do we put those placements? What industry, publications, associations do we utilize? What's the breakdown of our workforce? It was a great, I think I saw a great presentation from one of our partners who identify your workforce profile. And depending where you fall, yes, it was FDOT. Sorry, Board Member Miller. It demonstrates the types of needs based on where you are. So depending where you fall, some may not require salary as the most important thing to them. Some may require some other benefit, which I won't go into all the details. But understanding what that mix of our current workforce and then our coming and looming workforce for the agency. What are those benefits, discussion points, decision points that we need to make as an agency? That's what's next. That's what's coming. You've said we have a new mission and vision. Everyone will be soon empowered to explain how we get there. You'll understand, regardless of your role in the organization, how you help us meet this metric, whether it's with the FTC, the Florida Transportation Commission, whether it's a metric or measure that you, the board, say, these are critically important areas that are important to you. That's how we get there in the first 30 days.
Mr. Austin, could you expand on your expertise in tolling?
Sure. So let me start with, I guess, my work at Florida Department of Transportation. I don't think there was one issue, I won't say incident, event spanning all of the districts, including the Florida Turnpike Enterprise, that I didn't have some fingerprints on. Early on, as you'll recall, now that, well, I was on the FDOT side, back in 2019, there was a very public conversation and dialogue in every region of the state, primarily in South Florida, around toll relief, around an issue with a vendor, performance measures and metrics, and I'm speaking broadly in a public session, that impacted the tolling industry, both the Turnpike and other toll agencies. How the secretary and leadership team at the time would deal with the constant public pressure from the Miami Herald, from Lawrence Maurer, as I remember, in the Times, the Tallahassee Democrat, all complaining about relief and about issues, metrics, measures, or lack thereof in the industry. That's a hands-on example of some behind-the-scenes wrangling changes that occurred, and it was a very public thing. I'll shift to, and I could keep going, the most recent Leadership Academy with IBTTA. My Sweet 16 class, as we're called. Many who knew my public service background asked to have a very public conversation on several topics. how do you do well in transportation, tolling, with public engagement, regardless of the type of state that you're in? That's a tough question if you've never answered it. But to have that public conversation and thirst from other leaders around the country, because they see what we do in Florida. They know GMX is the new agency on the Hill with a new mission and vision. How then were you contemplating a budget and work program? How then were you thinking about local small businesses? How then were you thinking about, I'll use a taboo topic, work from home in tolling, that many agencies are still grappling with to this day? So to have a very public conversation just recently, a couple months back, with many of those toll leaders around the country, many said, you understand how to engage veteran businesses. How do you do it in Florida? I explained how to get it done. I showed and demonstrated that over the years, the state, our predecessor agency, and today GMX has done an absolute phenomenal job engaging all vendors, regardless of who you are. As we talk about monitoring that utilization of small businesses as an example, in a state, as I explained to other states that have a mandatory process or policy for set-asides, I demonstrated in Florida and in our agency, we don't have a mandatory set-aside for those types of firms. In the absence of that, let me demonstrate and show you the data. It was interesting to hear many of those states have a difference of opinion after the conversation, because they're still struggling with other issues. But we were able to demonstrate here what we've done and hopefully what's to come.
Thank you. How would you improve the performance of our facilities while reducing operating costs?
Performance of facilities. We've done it already. If you recall, in less than 90 days serving as the interim executive director, I looked at the entire structure of the organization. I looked at titles, where everyone sat in the organization. Were there some services on the operations side that we could do away with? Were there some contracts, commitments that maybe didn't make sense to continue? I think the one example, there was one contract that I canceled as an example around lobbying services. Let me give one example. What better lobbyist, quote unquote, than you, the board? What better lobbyist or advocate than me, maybe serving as interim under your direction? That was a real life example of all the contracts that you tasked me to go through on the operations side. That was one specific contract that I immediately thought made sense not to continue with. That doesn't mean that we can't reconsider maybe at a different point. That was 200,000+ in savings. think our predecessor agency at one point had 2, maybe 3 lobbyists. But let's talk about outcomes. This past legislative session, there were no negative actions or impacts to GMX. So if you now ask me, you did away with a service that you previously had where the agency would pay a team or teams to do these things, but now we had an outcome that delivered. There were no negative actions against the agency. That was real savings this year, this current budget. We continue to look at all of our facilities as a credentialed ADA coordinator, also by profession. That's been something that's critically important to me. In every position I've held in many agencies. I think after 90 days, we showed a savings north of $1 million with that one service and other services. The budget that you just approved demonstrated even more in savings across the organization on the operational side. Now, that did not stop as you approved. We've maintained services. We've added services. We've enhanced services. But I think the track record that we've already demonstrated, you have demonstrated as a board, millions of dollars in savings on the operations side, and more to come.
Thank you. Do any board members have any follow-up questions before I give Mr. Alston a few minutes to have some closing comments? Okay.
Can you provide examples of your interaction with the financial markets or rating agencies? And/or your involvement in a public financing event?
Yes. I'll use the most recent. And actually, let me back up and say, during this transition, we have had a series of strong partners, many agencies who have provided great counsel and advice. The Florida Division of Bond Finance comes to mind. Very early on, before July 1 and around July 1, thinking through what are the types and the content of a voluntary disclosure that we should share? What's important? What does industry want to know about governance, as you saw in Fitch's statement? What do the markets want to know about fiscal sustainability? How you handle your cash, your reserves? What's your approach? Is it pay as you go? Can we do additional debt at this point? Those are all the types of questions that we grapple with. And the Division of Bond Finance and so many others provided great counsel to me, to the team, and others. I've had great relationships and conversations with all 3 rating agencies. I recall Moody's was just here 2 months ago and sat with the full leadership team, wanting to understand where you were headed as an agency. They were watching then to see if the board would approve a budget and capital work program what will be the elements of it? Would one big project be a part of that plan, Kendall Parkway? If it was, what are the constraints it then would put on the agency now? What are the types of decision points that you were considering should Kendall Parkway, as an example, if we were to include it in the budget? What are the types of deliberations that were occurring? Was the board ready to make decision points today, then, on tolling? Did we know today what those full costs in 2024 are? Have we done anything independent? We've seen the costs, we know construction costs, we know where things continue to go that way. Have you, the agency, done anything now as GMX to validate, verify? That was a good Moody's conversation about 2 months ago with myself and the full leadership team and council. What are the pending litigation items? What are the other noise in the atmosphere that may prevent the board from making decisions? You know what my answer was? The board can unilaterally make decisions now. That was very clear July 1 forward. That was my message to Moody's, and to the other two. I'm talking about Moody's. There are no constraints on governance. There are no constraints on doing the right thing fiscally. There are no constraints on doing the right thing for people, for the agency. The board is not constrained. I shared with Moody's, the law is clear. I've had conversations with S&P and Fitch downstairs, all to understand where are you headed as an agency then. So what have we subsequently done since you, the board, have now passed a budget and work program? We've shared with all of our rating agencies. Here is demonstrated governance. Here is demonstrated collaboration. Here is demonstrated transparency. That you, the board, went through a months-long process with staff, developing all elements of a budget and work program that you have now approved. So I think I've had, back to maybe 3 different interactions with all 3 agencies. As you know, we've assumed the rating of our predecessor agency with 1. I think the other 2 clearly saw and are pleased, I would say, with the progress, with the direction, and the decisions that the board has made. Picking on Fitch, that I think I brought with me somewhere. They were very clear that if they objectively looked at all other factors, and they put GMX next to any other agency, they should increase the rating. We tried as hard as we could. I wanted it to happen. But the good news is I'm hopeful that this next time around, as I've demonstrated in my look ahead, that maybe that is one outcome that you will see as a board. The other 2 agencies, we're also hopeful, will do something similar. They've recognized your leadership, your decision-making, governance in action, being prudent, fiscal stewards. So hopefully a year from now, that 1-year outlook will have 3 different agencies up there recognizing the work that you've done as a board. So I'm hopeful. I think you have empowered me as interim to have those conversations, and I appreciate you as a board. The chair who has quarterly signs the financials, the treasurer who quarterly receives the financials, the treasurer as we're working to do a follow-up now with the CFO on things coming and looming, all of you knowing the system, done ride-alongs, seeing the operation. That's what every independent agency and source wants to hear and see. You've done it. It's a very clear example of how you've got it right. It's a very clear demonstration that regardless of the independent third party, in this case, your question was around rating agencies, I think they have validated and verified everything you've done to this point.
Okay. Anyone else?
I just had one question, and let me preface this that it has been consistently seamless with your position as a school board member. We've never noticed that you are also doing that, only because you have been present and like I said, very seamless on that front. Just as a clarification, just to be open about it, when is your next election, and do you envision that we will, an election is different if you would have to have a campaign? What time commitments or time constraints do you envision that may or may not affect
No,
what you're currently,
yes, no, that's a fair question. So let me back up. You're correct. I was very upfront with the board with the list of all of my service up front. If you recall, there are many commissions, councils, task forces that I currently serve on in the transportation world and in other worlds as well. So I was very clear with the chair up front, outlining all of those public service areas, which I thought was very important to be transparent. I have been serving for the last 2 years almost on the school board of Broward County. Yes, I'm here all the time, except unfortunately, when the board there meets, and sometimes their meetings, they meet. I have not made a decision on re-election, or sorry, I should say retaining the seat, being originally appointed to the seat. I'm actually in that stage right now because I believe the week of June 10th is the decision day for that. My wife has actually told me already what her decision point is. So we have had a very open conversation around that. I know this is public. So I will just say that my number one priority is GMX. My number one focus is GMX. While I enjoy serving in different roles, I think you can also see that the body of work that we've been able to accomplish, even if I just say July 1 forward, based on your leadership, your direction, has been off the charts. I want to continue that progress. I want to continue getting those big wins if given the opportunity. Because a year or two from now, when we all look back at this experiment, as some may call it, this will have proven to be a solid case where a board has developed a budget and work program in less than a year. A board has set a new mission and vision in less than a year. A board that has directed staff to have open conversations and dialogue with various partners in less than a year. A board that has empowered employees from day one in less than a year. So I'm pleased about the direction. I think hopefully I can speak for most of really all of the employees. Look, it was a very, as you all know, an topsy-turvy, right, transition, right? But I think many of the employees and vendors, consultants, just kind of the whole community, have been pleased with the progress. And I'm happy to continue if given the opportunity.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Alston, feel free to, you have a few minutes if you want to make any kind of closing comments before we conclude.
Sure. Well, first, to the search committee, members of the board, this has been a great conversation around what's next for GMX. This has been a great conversation around looking over the last year, but now thinking through what the next several years could and should look like. I've demonstrated many years of public service. I've demonstrated my understanding of the state industry. I've demonstrated my understanding of South Florida. I've tried to illustrate having a clear vision going forward. I've tried to demonstrate that you need someone in the seat who will look 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out. I've tried to demonstrate you as a board were very clear on 4 strategic priorities and how you embed those all throughout what you do as a board and an organization. New mission, new vision, strategic framework. So going forward, you will ask, how do you measure what's important for the agency? I've tried to give you a forward view on what that could look like. I've been humbled to serve as the interim executive director. This process started, as you know, back in 2021. I recall our first meeting. I recall our second meeting. I recall the locations of them both and the variables and things that were happening at the time. Now let's fast forward. I recognize all the progress just in the past year. You as a board have demonstrated so much. You've led. There's now no question that GMX is the premier tolling industry and will be, should be going forward. There's no question around the jurisdiction of the agency. We continue to put things in place, as I shared at the last meeting, both on the Miami-Dade and the Monroe County side. The types of operational improvements, regular maintenance that we should be doing now. Having someone who understands that big picture of both the 5 areas you've asked during the interim period, the opportunities that could be ahead, but also not shy about talking about challenges. That's leadership. You need the right leader who will make the quick, decisive decision when it's needed all the time, especially when safety is on the line. I've demonstrated that over the last several months. This has been a great opportunity, awesome experience, awesome team, awesome staff. Will I continue to assess, review? Of course. That's ongoing, continuous improvement. I don't think you would want anyone as your permanent executive director to say something different. My eyes are open. I have a clear sight based on your direction where we need to go. So with that, members of the board, search committee, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to continuing in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Alston, for your time and your comments today. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Yeah, the housekeeping.
I was about to ask the chair.
About housekeeping, can we have 5 minutes between
Yes,
things?
absolutely.
So we're going to take a 5-minute break before we continue, okay?
110, you want a little longer?
the process. So, Ms. Hedges go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I don't have it. Our next candidate, Roger.
Good morning,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Leonard. How are you?
Good, yourself?
Thank you. Let's start by allowing you a few minutes to introduce yourself, please, to us.
All right, well, my name is Roger Leonard. I live in St. Augustine, Florida presently. I come down and I do appreciate the chance to speak before the board relative to this employment opportunity. I look at this as a bit of a capstone opportunity for myself. I've done, as you see by my resume, quite a few different things. I've had several senior leadership positions. I am a veteran. I retired from the military some years ago, and I was a submariner. I learned quite a bit from that. I hold a master's degree in public administration, concentration in management. I have owned and run several, well, two large corporations, a development company and an aviation company. I served in the federal government for approximately 8 years as a senior Fed. I was a GS-15 regional director for HUD, one of the 43 individuals that hands out most of HUD's money relative to entitlement and competitive grants, disaster recovery grants, and so on. My jurisdiction was Louisville, Kentucky, which was Kentucky and southern Indiana, and we had signatory authority for the secretary. During my period there, I did win 2 secretarial awards. One, which may be of interest to you, was for a transportation corridor coordination with the state of Kentucky concerning the opportunities for broadband development during construction of interstates. I left HUD in 2018, and I have been consulting recently with several of the various governors and their staffs relative to the use of ARPA, SLSFRF money, different COVID recovery funds. I've served as a senior advisor, senior planner, senior PM, and I presently just finished up a contract, and I got a call from your organization, from Michelle, and took a look at this opportunity. And again, I look at this as an opportunity perhaps for a capstone position, bring many of the skills I've developed and had the good grace to develop relative to leadership, management, and strategic planning, strategic thought. I certainly appreciate the chance to be here today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Mr. Leonard, thank you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Could you provide an example from your professional background where you successfully led a team through a substantial period of organizational and cultural change? What was the outcome? And based on that experience, how would you approach culture changes differently in the future?
Well, I think obviously, at least from my perspective, every time you enter into a senior leadership position, you are going to encounter many opportunities to learn. There's going to be many unintended and unexpected issues to arise. The one that I would probably point to as the most telling example was I was hired when I left the federal government as someone with a bit of a legal background, a federal background at the high level, capable of interacting with senatorial and congressional inquiries and actions, and handling quite a large sum of funds, federal funds, state funds, and local funds, in building a large air carrier airport. When I come into the situation, the company that hired me when I come out of federal service, in fact, they recruited me while I was in federal service. I was thinking about retiring at the time, and it just kind of gelled together. Was Alteg Engineering in North Dakota. And I'm from that area. I was born in North Dakota. And I thought, well, chance to go back and see family, but more importantly, to continue my interest in transportation and specifically aviation. When I come into that job, on the very first day, I was told the company was going to get fired. That was a rather traumatic awakening. They told me they had problems. I thought, well, there's nothing in the technical line that I can't solve. I'm a good manager. I haven't seen anything I can't manage yet. But when I got in there, I found out that there was a lot of issues with personalities, different perspectives, and I really think a lack of respect. What I did was I come in and I met the mayor, I met the local congressman and the U.S. senator, who were basically the people driving the project. It was a $350 million new air carrier airport being built in the Bakken of North Dakota. It's XWA, Wilson Basin International Airport. I was the senior leader on that team, managing basically everything except the engineering. I had a PE who was a co-team leader. He led that part of it. But the thing is, it had fallen apart between the various parties and interested individuals. In that, they had lost faith in the timetable that was going to be able to be kept. They were looking at opening the airport October 19th of 2019. And at the time, when I did a critical path analysis of where they stood with the various major elements of that project, it was clear that they were falling way behind. And with that, it's an integrated project like most are today, where if one thing fails, everything fails. So what I did was I went in and I took a look at how things were working, which really led me to believe or assess how they weren't working, and make an inventory of those, and then ponder how I would go about correcting those. Now, the period of time we're talking about for this analysis was a matter of about a day. So I was doing a 4-hour drive up to the site in Williston, North Dakota. And to replace the existing airport with a new greenfield airport, and the conditions that were given, and the fact that the contracts for the company I work for were in jeopardy because of failure of meeting criteria, specific criteria. I think that led to a lot of controversy. Obviously, there was a lot of pressure on the senator, the congressman, to get this thing to do what they said it would politically and time-wise, get all of the intricacies brought together to make this happen. There was a lot of infighting between the various prime contractors. It was a very complex situation that needed to be brought together. Now, could I solve it in one day? No, I couldn't. But what I did do was I took a look and assessed on an honest basis where they were at. And then I sat down and had a frank discussion with them in their city hall. And I pointed out that there were several areas that were functioning well. However, there were critical issues that weren't being met, weren't being planned properly, and how we would go about doing that. Now, I laid out a high-level strategy, and that strategy stuck together fairly well through the entire process. We did have to let one of the primes go, who it was rather interesting because these primes are rather unique. They ended up going after the bond that the prime had, and the bond company got involved, and I knew they would. I pointed that out to the city and to the state, and we ended up resolving those through that inventory analysis that I had done just in that one day. That was the pathway. Now, obviously, as I said, not everything gets solved in one day. But as a relationship built over the next several weeks, we cemented together a plan that led to the fact that we could complete that project and meet those critical path objectives and open that airport on time on October 19th. So if you look in the record, you'll see that, in fact, that opening did occur. And that was a very challenging thing because there were so many moving parts, so many people involved. There were 600 people working on it. There were several prime contractors and subcontractors. There was the political actors, the state actors, and the expectations of the community. That is a very complex situation. I would expect you probably see some of those situations arise in many of the projects you do yourself. When I drove into Miami, I noted that you had your various expressways and express lanes and so on, the signage and, getting people here and moving people around. So I would expect that those skills might come in handy in what you may need in an executive director.
Thank you.
Sir.
What strategies would you implement to ensure that the agency's vision and mission are integrated into its day-to-day operations?
Well, I've served in many roles over the last few years. Many of it somewhat foreign to me because it's remote work. I know this job is not that. This job is going to take a on-site, hands-on manager to couple with the capacities of your staff and your state and your stakeholders and gather an understanding of what the community wants and needs and how that would be resolved to the best accomplishment possible. Now, again, I look at this as a situation of not just management, but also community relations where you are talking to the various stakeholders, community holders that deal with this. When you deal with something that's such an integral part of the community, and I'm sure all of you are well aware that the network you manage can be a huge frustration point for many in the commercial sector, in the private sector, and just the regular citizenry, getting around the Metroplex. I mean, it is something that's going to take quite a bit of attention. So I think that what would solve what you've asked would be someone that's going to be able to invest the time and the skills and the experience set in how to go about bringing together an assessment and then a resolution to various issues that you're going to have involved on a day-to-day basis. Leadership at the on-site level is going to be very intense. Not that you're going to lead and be involved in every bit of minutia, but it's clear that with the many moving parts, the many employees that you have, the many stakeholders and community interests you have, and you guys are right out there front. I mean, everybody that comes to Miami is going to come through, more than likely, some aspect of what this authority deals with. And I think that you are presenting the first look, in many cases, to the community in total. When somebody drives down and they're on 95 and they come in through the expressways and they take a look at what's going on, if this is being mismanaged, if this is not being managed well on a day-to-day basis and in a strategic long-term basis, there's going to be serious problems. So I think it takes someone dedicated to the issue of being here, thinking about this, and managing it all the time.
How do you ensure effective communication and collaboration between the board and the management team of the agency?
Well, I think the position you're filling right now is a pivot point. If the executive director doesn't have the skills to interface between the employees and the day-to-day people that operate your authority, and implement the policy in a fashion that meets the intent that you put forward, you've got a big problem. So I think, obviously, you're looking at a critical point right now. I was a board member for 4 years myself. I know how difficult it can be to set up on that dais and say, this is how we're going to do things, and then either your contractors or staff struggle to implement that policy. I think that the person that sets in as your executive director has to be an interpreter. They have to interpret the policy that you set, and they have to then give you feedback to make sure that it is practical policy, something that can be done, and can be done within budget and within reason, within time, within need. And then they have to pivot and be a manager, and they have to then empower those people that are in the organization to implement that policy. And I think that that policy expression to the community adds an element of expectation. They expect you to perform what you say you're going to do. They're not going to take that, well, we're going to have a roadway, as an example, in 2 years, and then it turns into a 10-year project. That gets rather sticky. I think that what you're looking at now is the appropriate focal point. The 3 candidates you're interviewing today, you should pick the candidate that you think is going to give you a strategic insight into what you want and help you form that policy. and then take that as marching orders on how to implement that through the staff and meet the expectations of the community. And that needs to be communicated clearly. And much of what I've spoke about is about communications. If I don't understand what you tell me that you want, if I misinterpret it, if it gets a little bit twisted, then the outcome is not going to be what you expect. You're going to be frustrated. Then there'll be frustration in the community because you said you were going to do things that didn't get done. Communication is vital to this position and to your strategic interest, because once you communicate in public like you're doing right now, you lead or develop a series of expectations in the community and within your staff as to what's going to happen and where we're going. So I think communications is obviously the very first thing that needs to be on point and very accurate.
Thank you. What measures would you take to ensure that GMX maintains a positive public image?
Well, I think with anything to do with the public, you got to be honest. You've got to be truthful in what you can do. You can't build expectations that are unrealistic. And when you set that expectation, you communicate that to the public and to the community. If it is on the edge of just, hey, I really can't do this, but it sounds awful good politically, you're in trouble. And I think you need to back up, and then you need to make sure that you're communicating what you can deliver. And looking at your organization from the outside in, which I'm wondering whether this is the position for me, so I researched you guys. You have a multidimensional issue of coordination and management. That multidimensional issue falls into a rather complex cash flow situation. And that cash flow, in my research, even indicates that you have significant accounts receivable that you need somebody to go after. Now, 2 of the contracts I recently dealt with had an issue of accounts receivable not being pursued by the managers, specifically the program manager, and it puts in jeopardy the potential that the group can provide because that resource is going to waste, to want. It's somewhere around $5 million, I believe. So how you go about getting that and how you go about resolving that issue, and maybe it's an issue between parties to be negotiated, or maybe that number's not quite right from my research, but apparently you do have some outstanding receivables you need to resolve. Now, I think you need to assemble all resources you can get your hands on. So cash flow is one thing, cash management is another. As far as capital operating and other budgets, I've managed both of those, capital and operating and ancillary budgets. I think what you need to do is you need to be very clear about what you're going to do with each and how you're going to do it. So I think that, again, falls back to communication and strategic thought, and then strategic expression of policy that is then sent down to staff, your executive director and on down, and to be implemented.
Can you elaborate on your experiences in developing relationships with the community, partner agencies, and elected officials?
Well, I have probably the best example when I was with the federal government. Nothing puts you in a hot seat faster than to be the guy that has billions of dollars, and you go out into the community and talk to all the mayors, congressmen, senators, and communities, and you tell them in a plan that you publish that we're going to do all these things through your surrogates, which is the cities and the counties and the state. And I think that that is a period where honesty and frankness and reality as a manager really need to be implemented. I did that for 8 years, and I did it well. If you look at my my rankings and scorings in my record with the federal government, you'll find that I was very successful at that. I tried to be out in the community and provide them the information that I could on projects and plans. I tried to make sure any program expression on either a strategic or an expenditure level. We did a plan, a 5-year strategic plan, and then a yearly action plan, which is the expenditure plan, where we said we're going to do A, B, C, and D. I think you need to communicate those things. And I think, again, you're an integral part. You're woven into the community. People getting around Miami and the surrounding area is a vital asset to the community. I would point out to you that you better not make too many mistakes, that they're watching. So I think that you have to be very vigilant. You have to pay attention to what's going on. You have to engage. And I think your executive director should be the one that makes sure he has an inventory of capacity within staff to accomplish, again, what the policy elements you're setting. So I think, again, we fall back to the fundamental of communication, leads to strategy, leads to the development of actual outcomes, and then it communicates what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then I think you need to follow up. When you have your successes, you need to speak to those, but by the same token, you need to be fully engaged in areas that aren't working quite so well. That's where you need to put more horsepower, more manpower. How do I resolve that? Do I send my executive director out to a community meeting to explain why something didn't get built, why something's tangled up? Maybe. Maybe the engineer goes out there with him. Maybe the engineer goes out. It's hard to say. But I think you need to keep on top of it. Somebody needs to manage that. And I think your oversight, you're not going to control that day to day, but you're counting on whoever you hire for the position we're speaking of to make those decisions for you. So I think you better pick somebody that is going to represent your interests to the best possible means, and somebody is going to be proactive at doing that.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard, how do you motivate employees to reach their full potential?
Well, believe it or not, I'm an older guy. I've been around a while. I led in the military. I enjoyed it. I miss it every day. I led in my own companies that I built myself. I had several airplanes, and I had several employees. I had 40 full-time employees and about 100 part-time employees in my aviation company. I was the leader. I was the chief pilot. I provide leadership in my consulting services to the various chiefs of staff, governors, and their staffs. And I think the way you lead is by example. If you're not willing to do it, well, don't ask someone else. And that doesn't mean you're out there digging ditches, you're doing everything. No one can do everything. Leadership is about commitment, being there. You lead by example. If things are not going well, you're not the guy on vacation. If things are getting stressful and the community needs to hear from you, you're not the guy that takes a few days off. You got to be there. And you set that example to your subordinates. At the level we're talking about for this position, obviously there's a lot of people that perhaps directors and so on that are going to be engaged through the hierarchy. Depending on the issue, you need to make sure you're coordinating an effort to set the example. So getting back to how do you develop them? You're a mentor. I've been a mentor many, many times. I like that. I think that's necessary. I was mentored when I was a young guy, and I tell you, it really helped. It gave me insight that I didn't see. Now, I didn't always like it at the time, but it was something that was very valuable to me. And I think being able to give people enough rope to develop their own experience is very vital if you're going to be a successful mentor. Everyone that I've ever seen that's led to a successful business or management position or whatever they're doing in life, if they're going to be successful, they have to run the rope out themselves every once in a while. They have to be able to take charge. They have to develop the ability to speak before people, articulate what's going on, and develop their skills. Now, are they all going to be orators? No. Are they all going to be the greatest managers? No. But you develop people to the full potential that they have available to put in the bucket to you and to the organization you're dealing with. And a position like this is a prime time. You ought to have not only that public speaker and that manager and that strategic thinker and that strategist and that financier and that guy that understands law and all those things. You ought to have somebody that's going to develop the people behind them, the people that work with them, because that's how things get done. You multiply your efforts through others when you're in an organization if you've done your job. If you're not mentoring to that level, you're failing. And that's why it's vitally important. And I think the question is very germane. And I think, to put it in just a few words, a mentor is an active manager engaged with his staff and folks and leads by example.
Thank you. What do you consider to be the most important strategic priorities for our agency over the next 3 years?
Well, I think that given the fact that your organization handles quite a fair sum of money for many projects that get funded, you have to have a clear understanding of where your finances are going. I think everybody's been fortunate over the last few years in the amount of cash that's floating around out there. I think you ought to start thinking about how do I deal with things. Now, I understand your organization doesn't take many grants, but you ought to be able to take a look at especially sustainability grants and how do I bring those into the fold. And I think you need to take a look at strategic priorities that deal with the projects you've already articulated to the public and where they stand. I think you ought to do an ongoing inventory of where you stand with those projects. Where am I wanting? Where am I succeeding? Where am I, where do I need more attention? I think that some of the other things that this organization should take a look at, as with many, is do I have a succession plan that makes sense? Do I have key people that could leave that I haven't got anybody else that I could replace them with? Succession planning in organizations like this is important. I think the other thing is every employee to a certain degree is an ambassador for your organization. I think you need to have a good rapport with all of your organizations from the board on down. And that channels through your executive director. And if he is engaged and he's bringing people forward for your recognition and he's talking about what's going on, I think you have a comfortable feel for where they're at. And more importantly, I think that the employees then engage more fully with the organization where they're feeling that they belong. So I think those are the strategic issues you should look at, and they're fundamental to just about any organization. But I think your cash flow situation, that's the thing that fascinates me about you. How does all that work? How do all those quarters and dollars and all that, how do that funnel to your projects and so on? I think that those type of things would be interesting, but they're going to happen no matter what. The other thing is what's going to happen with the development of your community. You obviously have to have a good liaison, and I'm sure you do, with the various constituents of your area of service and how you're going to meet their expectations, their needs, and what's going to happen. I see a lot of development going on. That's going to bring in more traffic. How are you going to deal with that? I was stuck in several stoppages along the 95 corridor. How are you going to make that better? I think those are things you strategically look at all the time organically. But I think like any organization, you also have to develop within. You have to develop your staff. You have to develop your core abilities and constituencies.
Could you describe a challenging situation in which you led your team and how you applied your leadership skills to achieve the desired outcomes?
Excuse me for just a minute. Again, I'll go back to my career with the federal government. They gave me a lot of interesting things to think about. I was dealing with a very senior senator, and there was an instance where we issued a state level financial federal finding. It was for $1.5 million to be paid back by the state to the federal government. That creates a bit of controversy because when you give a grant out and some entity spends that grant comes in as money that perhaps they had not anticipated spending in their normal budgeting process. So they're kind of hanging out here. Well, when you find that they've spent it wrong and you make them pay it back, that comes out of their organic budget. That displaces money in their budget and somebody doesn't get what they thought they were going to get that year. So it becomes a bit testy. When I wrote that finding, a senior senator had involved himself in it because he was involved in it. And it was perhaps not correct. I'm not saying anybody was unethical or anything, but it was incorrect. And it got moved up to a very high level. Now, getting to your question of how did I react? How did I deal with my staff? My staff found that finding. I validated it from a clear email generated by the state's attorney that it was unlawful. And it got to be rather tense. And there was a question of whether my staff had conducted themselves properly at a monitoring where this was found out. And I told the people that I work for in Washington that as the setting jurisdictional officer, I would conduct an investigation. I was not part of the monitoring. I was the director, but I wasn't part of it. I would investigate it and report back. Well, clearly, the staff had conducted themselves appropriately by all indications I had from my discussions with other state staff members that were being monitored and my staff members themselves. I reported back to Washington that I felt that my staff had conducted themselves appropriately. I didn't bring up the attachment with this particular issue, but I had indicated that there was apparently an unfounded statement that they had conducted themselves improperly during this monitoring, and that I had no basis to go forward, and I was going to have to depose other actors associated with this outside my organization, my office in Washington, to determine how this come about. Well, at that point, it was dropped. But I tell you, standing up at that level, risking my own job, enamored my staff with the understanding that I was there to do the right thing. Now, if they'd done something wrong, it would have been just as far the other way. But I made it clear to them that if they had done no wrong, I was going to stand up for them up to the point of my own jeopardy. And I meant that. And that meant a lot to them. And after then, we were always a tight staff, but after then, I think people understood that there's even more to it. And I think that's the level you need to go to at times. You need to do the right thing for the right sake. And if you do that, rather than maybe sacrificing somebody because it's convenient, that means a lot. And I think that's what shows a good leader and a good manager.
What would be your priorities in your first 30 days as executive director of GMX?
Well, again, I fall back to my research, and I'm sure I'll find out more the first day I get here. I think that I would do an inventory for myself of just what's going on and who's who, what projects you have online in your cooker right now. What are you doing right now? What are you planning for the next 5 years? What are you planning for the next 10 to 30 years? Then I'd take a look at your finances. I'd take a look at where you stand. How are you going to fund all this stuff? What are your commitments? What are your cash flows? How do you layer funds with different opportunities from maybe state and local and federal funds? What opportunities could I bring to enhance that and inventory that? And then I think getting to know you, meshing myself into what the policy standard is right then, and where perhaps your retreats and your discussions are leading you for policy in the future. What should I expect? What are we going to be doing? What impacts are you looking at right now? I think the first 30 days is the honeymoon where you kind of figure out who's who and what's going on and what's to be expected. And I think this particular organization is very similar to when I come to the office, the field office I took over in Louisville, Kentucky for HUD was, what's the community expect? I think you need to get out and see what the community leaders are saying. What are the community, what's going on at the community meetings? Who's saying what? What's the expectation? Now, am I out there to drill into everybody's little pup tent out in wherever? I need to focus on what is germane to your operation and what's going on, and let people know I'm here and engage them and talk to them. Can I see everybody and inventory everything all at once? No, but it gives me a foot in that process to go ahead and find out what's going on. So there's many layers to it, and I think the key element is if you see me in the office too much or quite a bit, then probably I'm failing at that mission. I ought to be out collecting facts.
Okay, thank you. Could you expand on your expertise when it comes to tolling?
Tolling? Well, I paid a lot of tolls. I've looked at it as a macro policy issue in the fact that there's a sweet spot between what you toll and how you toll it. And I was involved in some of the discussions with Governor Gilmore back some years ago when I've lived in Tidewater, Virginia quite a while, Norfolk area. I still have a ranch back there, but I live in St. Augustine now. But part of my analysis of tolling was they were doing a lot of tolling studies to determine how to relieve congestion in the I-64 corridor in and around Norfolk. And one thing that I did look at for Governor Gilmore was the impacts that tolls have, how they impact people to take different routes, and then what impacts that has, and then what the expected take is, obviously, and then how to apply that. And then with what's going on now with onboard transponders and other recognition methods, tolling is much easier. When I was with the federal government, there was a big discussion that I got involved in and process on tolling on various bridges in the Louisville and Cincinnati area, and how that impacts what's going on. So I think it's kind of a social engineering issue as much as it is a revenue issue, because what you do with tolling is going to impact what people do. And I think that you need to anticipate, at least reasonably, if I put a toll on this road, what's going to happen to the road over here? And alternatives, how will that deal with congestion? And I think to a great degree, and it might not be your only mission, obviously, but I think you have to look at how tolls affect congestion management. How do I deal with that? What strategies do I pursue? And I tell you, I used to teach a course to senior federal people in my colleagues, if you will, in the federal government. It was called Strategy and the Art of Anticipation. And it was a pretty well-received course. I taught it maybe once a year, twice a year. And it's the same thing that would apply to the tolling issue. If you assemble as many facts as you can find about tolling and the impacts it'll have and the present methods and the present tolling structure, if you will, and then what I'm going to change or propose changing, just the assembly of those facts, at least in this course I taught, I indicated that by reviewing those facts and thinking about those things and pondering, you almost develop a ability by the assembly of those facts and the process of that analysis to maybe peek around the corner a little bit and determine what impacts are going to occur. And I think that's what you ought to be taking a look at, because I think you obviously want your roadways and expressways to flow as reasonably quickly as possible. You know, you don't want those buildups. You don't want those 5-mile backups. And I think that when you take a look at that, how do I collect the toll? How much do I charge? If I have an elastic nature of the tolling by time, how's that work? It can be very complicated. So I think the study about toll management can be rather complicated. And I think, again, it falls back to you voting with your policy as to what is important. Is revenue important? Well, then that's going to drive a parameter. Is congestion mitigation a parameter? What level is that at? And all exist, but at what level? And I think then you need to extrapolate out from there, you know, what policy am I going to set? How am I going to do this? Do I have hours that I have certain rates and other rates? And one thing that really caught my attention when I was building the Williston International Airport was when we set up the signage for the airport. It was out in a green field, nothing out there. We set up all the new roadways and new signage and everything. It was rather interesting. I thought the signs were pretty simple. Put a sign on a post, you know, come to the airport. Well, signage has a great impact. When you're whizzing by on the interstate and you've got all these signs and you're confused as where you're going and so on, I think you need to also, in your tolling, what's tolled and what's not tolled, Where do I stay if I don't want to pay the toll? Where do I go if I want to get the express? And so on. Those are important considerations. So it's a rather complicated topic. And it's not just one line that you need to pursue. It'd be multi-line analysis that would encompass many different thoughts. And some, while rather mundane, need to be considered, if nothing else, just in their practical impact. So I think that it's something that has to have a detailed discussion, and more importantly, how does it fall back to the priorities you have relative to your policy? Is your policy to make sure everything moves smoothly and you have no minimal congestion? If so, you need to toll in a certain way. If you want to develop maximum revenue, you perhaps need to toll in another way. If you want to have a mix of the two, or you want to toll in one area to cover costs for redoing that area, you know, there are many different strategies you'd have to look at to determine what kind of policy or formation of strategy you would use relative to tolling.
Okay. How would you improve the performance of our facilities while reducing operating costs?
Well, one thing I learned a long time ago is you can't do more with less. You can do more with what you have if you don't make as many mistakes. So I think, again, it goes back to good management. If you take a look at the inventory of facilities that the organization has in hand now, and you do a good analysis of where that stands and what's important to you, what is needed, and you focus your limited resources on those areas that are going to give you the biggest bang for the buck. In other words, what do I need the most? And you prioritize those on a reasonable basis, and you have good oversight and management of first upkeep and any further development or improvement of those. That's how you manage facility. And I think you probably, as I would assume, have quite an inventory of assets. So you're going to have to, your executive director's not going to have on the tip of their finger every issue that's going on with facilities. But they ought to understand, what are the priorities? What is failing and what's not? And how do I fix that? What resources do I need to bring to bear? When you're sinking stuff via your capital budget into facilities, you got to do it strategically. If you don't do it strategically, it'll eat you alive, because there's more of them than there are of you. So you need to think about what you're going to put your scarce dollars in to get the most benefit. And that, again, comes from management is about engagement. Management is about being there. If you don't know, it isn't going to get fixed. And when you need it, it's broken. And that's not going to help. So I think facilities management, which in the aviation business you do quite a bit of, you need to be aware of what you've got. You need to know what the resources you have to make it better. And that's driven by your priority on what you need, when, and where.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Are there any follow-up questions from the board? Yeah. Could you repeat the question, please?
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Thank you for your service and your contribution throughout your career. Can you provide examples of your interaction with the financial markets, rating agencies, and/or your involvement with a public financing event?
Probably a good example is I've done several private financing deals that have non-disclosure elements to it, so I won't focus on them. I'll focus on the public-natured ones. HUD has a program called Section 108. It's available to the 43 directors, which I was one of the 43. In your jurisdiction, anyone that has a CDBG allocations, Community Development Block Grant allocation, can utilize that. And it's set up and draws from an allocation set by Congress. And what it does is it allows a CDBG holder, through their entitlement funds, which they get recurringly every year, to draw up to 5 times their annual allocation. So if you have an allocation at the state level of, say, $100 million, you can draw a loan on this and finance it through Treasury funds at 5 times your allocation, or billion dollars, 500 million. So what I did was I was always interested in that when I got to HUD, and believe it or not, very few jurisdictions are aware of that, but it can become a very valuable development tool because it can be drawn just like a financing or a placement, only it's done through the Treasury through this allocation system. And what happens is you can set it up either as a direct draw of funds to a particular strategic plan, projects or project, and it can also be set up as a revolving economic fund, and that's the one that I thought was the most beneficial. And what would happen is Treasury would put forward bonds necessary to support a certain allocation of request. Say they had 500 million and they wanted to just set up 50 million in a revolving fund, as an example, to do economic development, slum and blight, or even transportation projects like roadways or aviation projects or train projects or whatever. What they could do is some of these things that they did were revenue generating, and they were the most complex, and that's where we got into assessments on ROI and different basis of payment, because what we did was we set up a 20-year revolving fund with Treasury and then drew against that for project accomplishments that would allow a community to do more than they could with just their regular allocation, because they could draw it forward. They could use it for housing, they could use it for roadways, they could use it for levees, bridges, anything you could use community development block grant funds for, which is, the list is almost infinite. But what it would do is Treasury would come out and they would provide the bond placement via Treasury bills. And what that allocation then HUD could use to break up into this. Now, once you set that, they assured the standing of that with their CDBG allocation as the backstop. But they would also define, in many instances, especially with the revolving funds, how they were going to get cash flow off of whatever they were doing. Maybe it was a tolled bridge, or it could be some kind of a concert center or whatever. And depending on the income that would come off that business or entity or enterprise, that would then service debt and relieve the revolving fund then to replenish and perhaps continue on through that 20-year period to do many other projects. The other was that we used a lot of blended funds. And those funds would come from either new market credits, historical credits, which the state managed, or they would come from CDBG or Home, HOP, or ESG funds, which are different programs HUD has. And we'd blend that to a project that was accomplishing multiple facets that the federal government, state government was interested in. As far as private placements, we did some private placements where a developer would come in and they would do their own funding. We would have to assure it. We'd have to have our lawyers look at it and make sure everything was lined up. And as an example, when I ran the disaster recovery program in St. Johns County, that's what brought me to Florida for Governor DeSantis. We had about $150 million in that CDBG DR allocation. And what happened was we used $30 million of that approved by the St. Johns County Board of Commissioners to entice a developer to come in with that subsidy, with an agreement that they would develop 2 large multifamily housing units, with 51% being low to moderate income housing, and that would be held that way for 20 years for this $30 million subsidy. Now, when we did that, we had to go through and vet the other financing. And we had to take a look at how they were placing it, what borrowing they were doing, and so on. The other thing is, when I was in myself, which I'll speak to my own private financing, I went through a series of financing for aircraft purchases that I did for my company. And while it was not the biggest financing deal in the world, it was important to me. I did deal with underwriters and so on, and it was a very similar process. I think that's really why I was so interested in Section 108. We went through an underwriting process to support that, and the financial analysis and financial stability statements and so on. to go ahead and run ourselves through that. Now, when I got to HUD, the underwriting for Section 108 was very similar to what the private sector does. We underwrote the ability of the grantee to pay back the money that they were committing and borrowing. Other than that, I have been exposed to private placements. I would assume that your organization probably does some significant borrowing, but underwriting principles are underwriting principles. Now, they expand or contract. They get complicated by many voices being involved. I think most underwritings I've seen are successful if you've decided clearly as a borrower where you're going, and you can state that as a strategy, and the person you're borrowing from, the entity you're borrowing from understands that. And I think when you do the underwriting and you do the financial analysis for, however you're going to fund the payback of that, and how you're going to stand as a, first, second, third, as far as the ability to pay, I think those things, in principle, are not very difficult to understand. It's just the complexity of all the moving parts and different interests that has to be watched. And I'd leave it at that.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Leonard? No. Mr. Leonard, those were the series of our questions, but we do want to give you a few minutes for any closing remarks that you may have.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. I appreciate it. It's been nice to get to know you a little bit, see your faces, and to see how you react to what I've had to say. I will tell you this, I have a wealth of experience. I've run companies, developed companies. I've served in the federal government at a pretty pressure cooker level, a high level. I've led my staff with distinction. I have tendered to you several letters of reference, and I look at this as an opportunity for myself to have perhaps a chance to share some of my experience and my learning, my training, and my education with others. I'm a mentor. I believe in that. I truly do. And I think I can add to the strength of your staff. I'm interested in this as more a capstone opportunity in my career line to give back to the community. Could I go off and make a lot more money doing something else? Truly, I could. I have, as you can see by my career path at certain points, I am interested in public service. I believe that we all should provide at the appropriate times what we can to the community. And we should be committed to the community to enrich it and to strengthen it. And with the experience and the level of education and opportunity I've had, I think I bring unique elements that would fit within what you are looking for your executive director. And I certainly appreciate all of you considering what I've said and what I've tendered and the opportunity to such an august board to be able to take a look at this as perhaps the capstone of my career. I'm getting to the point where I'll probably work another 5 to 10 years. I am looking for some place to land to do that, and that's why I'm here. But I certainly appreciate the time to speak before you and your community. I understand this is an open meeting, and I certainly look forward to any opportunity you may tender my direction.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. Thank you.
You all too. Thank you.
We're going to take another 5-minute break. Make it 7 minutes. 11:55. Thank you for your patience, Dr. Tamanya. So we'll be starting shortly.